pillagers, emboldened by the flame of ambition, have it writ upon thy meager grave, felled by King Morgott, last of all kings.
If there's one word I'd use to summarize Morgott, it would be pride. Something that can be seen as both a virtue and a vice, indeed a sin. And typically pride is interwoven with arrogance, but in Morgott's case, his pride isn't necessarily pride in himself, but in his family, his lineage, his inheritance. Which gives him somewhat of a curious dichotomy between his self-loathing and his pride concerning his bloodline. Concerning his name, there are of course some parallels to other names, but none that I judged all that relevant to this discussion. Perhaps the most curious one is how it is rather close to Morgoth, a name that Lord of the Rings fans will no doubt recognise, but there is no apparent connection there. As with many other characters, he has an M name, but perhaps that stems merely from Marika, with others seeking to choose names with an affinity to the God Queen. Along with his brother Mohg, Morgott was born to Queen Marika and the first Elden Lord, Godfrey. Omen born, he was however a noble, which meant that he didn't suffer the fate of having his horns excised, but was instead destined to live a life locked away underground, beneath the royal capital. And as many have noticed, at some point after his defeat at the hands of the Tarnished, Morgott's appearance takes a rather drastic change. His horns vanish and his form lessens. The shackle the Tarnished can use to temporarily bind Morgott is bathed in golden magic, the magic of the Elden Beast and the Erd Tree, perhaps lending some credence to how the Elden Beast usurped the primordial crucible in some sense, its blessings now seen as a curse. And yet, why does this curse, or blessing, fade with his defeat? This phenomenon is not witnessed in any other Omen, so far as I can recall. Could it be tied to his strong belief in the tree, a final mercy or final reward? Or does it merely imply the Tarnished brutalized Morgott to the point of removing all his horns? Given the distaste he seems to have for his cursed blood, it would be a rather sardonic reward from the Erd Tree to remove that curse from him as he is dying. At any rate, those horns were enough to see Morgott trapped beneath the city, imprisoned. But just when did he escape, and how? A logical assumption would be during the Shattering. Someone asked me if I thought Morgott fought during the war against the Flame Giants on account of his golden hammer having some resemblance to the Giant Crusher, an ancient weapon used by man's forebears against his mighty adversaries. Still, I don't believe that is the case. Rather, I believe it's more of a sign of Morgott's mastery of conjuration, or perhaps a sign of respect and fealty to his parents, Marika of course, waging war against the Flame Giants. Despite his supposed curse, Morgott is able to utilize what we can only assume are incantations, conjuring golden weapons, hammers, throwing blades, and the like to attack his foe. Another ability of Morgott's, potentially one shared by his brother Mohg, is one of what might be called possession or projection. Indeed, it could also be another side of the same ability as conjuring weapons. Morgott appears able to use another's body as a vessel, sending out his alter ego, as it were, Margit the Fell Omen. At least twice he uses this against the Tarnished. During their venture to Stormvale Castle, he leaps down from a tower, potentially having possessed the body of a soldier in that tower, although we don't see that. The second time, outside of Leyndell, we have a close-up view of Margit transforming from an otherwise inconspicuous enemy, in another attempt to extinguish the Tarnished's Meager Flame. I believe this ability was inherited by Morgott, and perhaps Mohg, from Marika, who we know has at least some form of transfigurative abilities herself. And whilst Mohg used it to fool the world into believing he remained beneath Leyndell, Morgott used it to seek out and vanquish would-be champions. Of course, it is also possible that Mohg did not inherit this ability, but rather Morgott used it on Mohg in some capacity to make that doppelganger or fake Mohg, that projected Mohg that we fight beneath Leyndell. We can assume that during the Shattering, Morgott escaped his imprisonment and seized this chance to claim control of Leyndell. It is possible that he was always able to escape, he just didn't choose to. He accepted his fate until the Shattering happened, at which point he felt compelled to step in. He is shrouded in mystery, indeed to the point he is referred to as the Veiled Monarch, which would imply that precious few know his true identity. Not even Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing. Likewise, he's referred to as grace-given, despite the game itself telling us that he was born graceless in his remembrance. So, how did he seize control of Leyndell? Was he able to cajole or persuade the soldiers? Trick them with a glamour? Force them into submission? Or did he work with someone else? The game offers precious few clues, so I believe it's largely up to you to decide exactly how he did it. Still, on that very note, let's take a look at two passages from the game. The first, Defense of Leyndell. A sovereign alliance rots from within, traces yet remain of bloody conspiracy. The second, Defense of Leyndell. The fell Omen stacks high the corpses of heroes, yet the Erdtree remains unshaken. By itself, that tells us very little, but that's why I'm here, to pore over every item in the game so you don't have to. Let's look at the first siege of Leyndell, a sovereign alliance. A sovereign is a ruler in this context, so it is effectively saying an alliance between high-ranking individuals. Some have taken this to mean Radahn, inferring that he sieged the capital, but there's no other evidence of this. The slide people believe to be Radahn is inconclusive at best, and very poor evidence at worst. So let's put that aside, and, well, let's look at some far more compelling evidence in the game, namely Godwyn's lineage. After the first defense of Leyndell, Kristoff earned the hero's honour of Erdtree burial for the feat of capturing Godfrey the Grafted. So, the first defense of Leyndell involved Godfrey being captured by Morgott's side, almost certainly. There is no evidence that Morgott himself was present during this siege, but it seems a sure thing, as it's almost certainly post-Shattering. Indeed, whilst it isn't entirely clear, I do believe the troops in this cinematic are showing Godric's colours of green and red, tree and beast surcoat, no? Of course, it wasn't specifically Godric, but these colours are associated with him, and probably with Godfrey. But in this instance, I think it's fair to assume that our battle was Godfrey against Morgott, the Sovereign Alliance either referring to those two or to Godric and Godfrey, with the former potentially betraying the latter. It's interesting to point out that Kristoff was opposed to Godfrey, despite being a devout worshipper of the ancient dragons, and it was Godfrey's ancestor, Godwyn the Golden, who befriended the dragons in the first place. So was Kristoff choosing Morgott's side over Godfrey? The Leyndell soldiers are sworn to defend Leyndell, so perhaps they follow Morgott simply because he is the best suited for that task. After all, he is wholly dedicated to it. And we can surmise after this first siege of Leyndell that Godric was hounded down to Stormvale, where he remained. The second defense is a lot harder to pin down, but during this one, we know that Margit made an appearance, stacking high the corpses of heroes. Some believe this was against Radahn's forces, but again, there's absolutely no mention of Radahn ever having designs as such. There is no mention, so far as I'm aware, anywhere in the game of him ever attacking Leyndell. For the most part, everything we know about Radahn has him situated in Caelid, around Celia. On the other hand, Rykard and his forces did battle against Morgott, the assault on Volcano Manor being a wretched, unending war with no glory. It's my belief that Rykard besieged the city, was driven back, and then Morgott's forces retaliated, but made no significant progress. And whilst this isn't exactly great evidence, well, remember that Margit was stacking high the corpses of heroes, and exactly who is it that the Volcano Manor is trying to recruit? And as a quick aside, there is a fire prelate within Fort Lyde. Which side do you suppose he fought for, if either? It is plain that Morgott and Rykard are at odds with each other, with one wishing to protect the tree, even with it spurning him, the other seeking to burn it down. Indeed, such was Morgott's devotion to his parents and their golden order that he founded the Knights Cavalry, these dark riders encountered many times throughout the lands between. They hunt down tarnished and would-be champions, for Morgott knows that no matter who stands before the tree, it will not deem them worthy. But did he also infer that, following this, a tarnished might be spurred on to the cardinal sin of burning the Erd-tree? Which brings us full circle. Morgott has both at once immense pride in his lineage and refers to himself as the last of all kings. Yet, he is also fully aware of his cursed blood, which he recants and seems to despise, remarking that he cannot bear the shame of staining the thrones with his curse. He knows they are all forsaken, his deeds met with failure, and so too will the Tarnished. Despite being ostensibly graceless himself, he refers to the Tarnished, very much in possession of grace at that point, as being graceless. Is our veiled monarch projecting in more ways than one? And just where do you believe his faith and willpower stem from? Is it love for Marika, for Godfrey, the parents who saw him imprisoned? And yet, Godfrey does seem rather fond of his son, judging from their all too brief reunion. A conviction, perhaps, to uphold that which his parents fought for as their son. Does the son have a duty to continue the legacy of the father? Morgott weighs each and every would-be champion against Hoarah Loux, and ultimately finds them all lacking.